And I have my colleagues here, Marina Markezic and Vyara Savova. Let me add them to the stage. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Would you like to share your presentation?
Yes, I can share.
Okay. So yeah, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity to speak here, and we are very happy that we can be here as the representatives of the European Crypto Initiative. Just a very short introduction from my side. I am leading the European Crypto Initiative. My name is Marina, and I'm a lawyer working in the crypto space for some time. For the last 6 years with the European Crypto Initiative, we have worked in the European Union discussing different topics. Mostly it was really about crypto and blockchain. So our goal is, as a policy advocacy organization, to basically share more about how the crypto industry works, specifically on a technical side, so how the blockchain works. And at the same time, we are following all these different regulations that are happening in the EU and trying to basically react to those regulations by writing different papers, basically also discussing things online, and at the same time, organizing events in real life. So again, very happy to have the opportunity to speak here, and I'm going to give the opportunity to introduce herself to Vyara, and then we can start with the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Marina, and thank you for the invitation. It's really, again, without repeating what Marina just said, but I'm Bulgarian, so basically everything that is currently happening in Ukraine is also something that I think about quite a lot. So this is great that we can be here and share our experience, and hopefully this would be something that will benefit you. Other than that, I'm a lawyer based predominantly in Bulgaria, but I work on EU issues, so quite often also in Brussels. My background is in human rights law and technology, and today I'm going to share more about the GDPR and privacy situation, but also anything related to human rights and democracy is something that I'm monitoring and working on quite closely.
So when we were thinking about what to present today, what would be the most useful, even after basically listening to all the presentations before, we thought that showcasing something that the European Union is doing to, give you some ideas on maybe what to do, maybe some also what not to do, but mostly how to support different use cases when it comes to blockchain and crypto, and mostly when it comes to then the legal aspects of what we have discussed. So you had brilliant discussions, roundtables already today, and we were talking a lot about the use cases, what would be the most interesting use case, or some that could help with basically the narrative. But here we are gathering also the parts where we're discussing how those use cases are regulated or have thought about being regulated, and then again, by doing that, thinking about would that be an interesting thing for Ukraine, or doing it in a different way. So what we have taught for today was usually mostly focusing on the data union strategy. So this is something that the EU is now working on, thinking about, is the big new strategy that they would want to present, mostly when it comes to data. So the most of the presentation will be covering data, but we also wanted within that cover the infrastructure and the identity part. I know that it was mentioned a few times today, data and privacy. And then at the end, just briefly about finance, because we have talked today about Mika mentioning tokenization. So just partially at the end, focusing on that as well. The first part that everyone knows why this is in a way interesting, but we wanted to just reiterate again the thinking about blockchain democracy, thinking about blockchain and the governance of basically a state, an entity, or even just a group, is really the transparency, part that is very interesting and I think very useful for everyone, specifically when we think about basically trust. But lately we are discussing privacy as well. So basically this competitiveness maybe between transparency and privacy, in which case transparency is the one that is important, and then when do we need privacy as well, also on the regulatory side. Then the data permanence, so basically thinking about blockchain and some data on the blockchain being there permanent, what that means from a regulatory point of view. And then again, the discussion around pseudonymity. This is something that Vyara will elaborate a little bit more later, but it's really something that we're thinking within the GDPR context as well. First, I'll share a little bit about the data union strategy, which is basically a very important strategy for the EU. As you know, the European Union has started with its new mandate. The Commission has started a new mandate this year, so it's the first year setting up the strategies for the next few years. The data union strategy is basically the next phase of the EU digital governance agenda, thinking about the rights, infrastructure, and innovation within the data framework. There's some very interesting discussions within the legal and technical foundations of the European data economy. And of course, lately AI has really taken in a way the main role. We are discussing the blockchain part as well, like always, and then decentralized data ecosystems is something that is also very interesting from a use case point of view. Very shortly, historically there has been discussions around data very early on, but the European data strategy for data has been developed in 2020, and then in the last 4 years, so in the last mandate, basically, we have adopted the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, ADAS, so basically the Identity System, the AI Act as well. So in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of discussions about data, and right now we're revisiting that part. So basically thinking about the data union strategy, and then also thinking about what that means for the data infrastructure, basically for the European infrastructure and for the European resilience itself. There has been a consultation for the data union strategy where the European, in a way, initiative has also written a report. And it was important for us to write the report and respond to that consultations because we wanted to bring the blockchain part into the data discussion. We think that specifically right now with the emergence of AI, when we think about blockchain and decentralized blockchain, there could be very interesting frameworks that could be built, and I would say reassurance as well when goals there are in a way to coordinate digital laws, rethink what has been written, what is in a way useful, and do we need to tweak certain parts of it. The other part is also enable the single market for data and think about competitiveness and the protection of rights. So both of those goals are important, might be also something that in a way you have thought in a way about as well, specifically the right protection on privacy, as again it was mentioned today already. But all these things can be done on different levels, on a governance level, on the infrastructure level, access, trust, etc. And basically this strategy is really something that would want to support that. When it comes to different parts of the strategy itself, as I mentioned, there has been different regulations and laws that have been in a way discussed on the topic. And ADAS is really a very important one because it is discussing basically the identity part, but also digital wallets, selective disclosure, etc. AI Act, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time there, but thinking about traceability, auditability of data. The Data Act, much more interesting, maybe from a blockchain point of view when it comes to smart contracts as well, because they have been in a way the first time when we have designed or defined the smart contracts in the EU as well. And it was really made at sharing and allowing interoperability when it comes to data spaces in the EU. So creating new marketplaces by sharing data and making this data interoperable. This was something that was very important for the Data Act. And then FIDA, the proposal and now the discussions is really the access of financial data, so mostly linked to financial transactions and similar, and what the framework around that is going to look like. So first, I would want to spend a few minutes on eIDAS. As I mentioned, it is a very important framework, mostly thinking about the digital wallets and the identity systems within the EU. Recently, it has been a very interesting moment because eIDAS and the framework around that, specifically with a qualified, with a basically act, looking into defining qualified ledgers. What that means is we're looking to basically implement this part of the regulation where we would define what qualified ledgers are, what is the status of a qualified ledgers, which means that if a ledger, if a DLT system is qualified, it could be then used within the eIDAS ecosystem, and it could be basically legally valid and basically put as a part of the tech stack for eIDAS. Unfortunately, what we have seen, and this is also why we responded to the consultation, is that by defining qualified ledgers and by asking a specific standards to be met, by default, most of the public blockchains will not be able to be part of the qualified ledgers. And that's really unfortunate because we do think that public blockchains are bringing something very, I would say, specific and useful. They have a utility for systems like the eIDAS 2.0. So in this case, if anyone from the audience is interested, you can always go to our website and read about our submissions. But small acts like that, small different implementing acts are also very important when it comes to the usage of the blockchain. And here it's also a moment to rethink, as we have heard again today in the panel and in other discussions, what are the differences between different blockchains? Do we really need to opt for one solution, or could we build systems that could in a way choose one or the other? When I'm thinking about one or the other, is mostly public or private blockchains in these cases. The second part that I mentioned was the Data Act, the regulation that is really designed to enhance and support EU data's economy. The idea here was really to support competitiveness, to create a new economy that could be thriving, that could be built on data. The very important part of the Data Act, it was interoperability, and this is why the authors of the Data Act were thinking about interoperability when it comes to different technologies, including the DLT blockchain, and while using smart contracts. In this case, we did have the first definition of a smart contract within the Data Act, and also to basically support interoperability, the design of a smart contract that could be used for some of the use cases within the Data Act was also designed. So the use cases within the Data Act, I would say, are very specific and quite limited. So I don't want to go into details there. It's really where data from IoT devices mostly is streamed through a smart contract, and then the smart contract is not developed in-house, but it's basically bought by a company. So it's again a very small and limited use case. But in that use case, the Data Act was basically saying the smart contract should not be immutable, should be basically mutable, and should have given access to the data through smart contracts to specific entities. That is, I think, the most interesting part, and in a way controversial as well. We have worked in the past on discussing and sharing what that would mean if those design features would be already defined in a law, or not even a standard, but really in law, and would be then limiting the open sourceness of the smart contracts. And also, I would say sometimes the the resistance, cybersecurity, etc., just because certain smart contracts will need to be developed only in Europe, only for very specific use cases, and they could not be really just copy pasted as open source code is, and by that being and made more resilient and also battle tested. So that is one thing that has been a very interesting discussion from our side. But at the same time, we have now the Data Act and it's implemented. So certain companies will need to comply with this Data Act at the moment. And another part that is also very important, when I go back to basically the union strategy, the basically data strategy, was few of the parts that we also wanted to discuss with you here, and we wrote in our submission, but mostly we really wanted to add the GDPR part and the GDPR connection with the blockchain. As you also know, there has been some discussion around that, and as I mentioned, Vyara will share more about it. But in those discussions, we also wanted to showcase a little bit more about the recent developments that happened in the blockchain space when it comes to privacy. We're thinking about mostly the basically privacy technology, zero knowledge proofs, etc., which I am sure you have thought about and looked into. But in these cases, I think that we maybe need to redefine how we're looking into blockchain when it comes to privacy and taking into consideration the recent discussions and the recent updates on the topic as well. And so for now, I'm going to stop here and give it to Vyara to give you a few moments to go into this topic that has been contested for quite a long time.
Yes, thank you, Marina. What's important here is to kind of also mention the fact that all these frameworks, same as what is happening in all jurisdictions, there are different levels. So we have more like the foundational or also known as horizontal laws that regulate everything, basically. One example of such a regulation is the GDPR. As we know, it's already has also an international impact. And then we have all those pillars that are built on top of those foundations that are regulations such as the marketing crypto assets regulation, including the FIDA that is on financial data, that is already some specific use case of the data. So in Europe, what we have been building and what we achieved in building is one extremely complicated system where multiple legal frameworks overlap. And because of these different hierarchies, it's also very difficult to even figure out what is applicable in which case, which is the reason behind the data union strategy, which Marina already highlighted quite nicely. And something that isn't in the slides because it's not official is basically the version of the proposal that we expect to come out soon enough, which already represents some of our issues. And they're obviously the European Commission in this case is also thinking about solutions. But when it comes to the GDPR, going back to this topic, again, it's a fundamental law. So anything that is being built needs to comply with it. So even though we have frameworks such as the marketing crypto assets regulation and other frameworks that regulate, for example, AI, we still need to acknowledge the core rules. Which is also a bit of a problem, particularly from the context of public permissionless blockchains, where you have quite a lot of purely infrastructure reasons why there cannot be clear-cut compliance with the GDPR that already calls for things like the right to be forgotten, where you can simply remove information from the blockchain in this case, which is not so easy. It's not to say impossible to achieve. And other reasons which have been why we have been quite vocal about this, and we have also proposed a few solutions because it's not about just saying that there are issues, we also want them to be solved. So the solutions we particularly proposed are around the understanding that there is a more specific type of anonymous data that needs to be considered in the context, not just in public blockchains, but whenever encryption mechanisms and other mechanisms for protecting the personal data are accounted for. So we call it functional anonymization. And in a sense, it represents all that encrypted data that, due to its specifics, cannot be connected to a specific person, so to speak, to the data subject that the GDPR speaks about. So there cannot be any real identification of that person. So even though the GDPR, and I promise I'm not going to turn this into a GDPR lesson, but the GDPR considers all encrypted data to be personal data. So basically all data that is on blockchain is to be considered as falling under the GDPR, because what blockchains use is basically encryption mechanism. So this doesn't work. And we were calling in our response for this functional anonymization, and also for redefining what a protected data really is, and how using these cryptographic methods such as zero knowledge proofs, as Marina mentioned, but not limited to that. So we are using privacy enhancing technologies as a catch-all term. So we don't have to just have a big list of things and then having to add things when new developments are introduced. And as well as basically just saying that there needs to be a clarity around the fact that pseudonymous blockchains should not be considered personal data by default, because this, again, going to the example of the foundational frameworks and then the pillars, if you make, for example, a technology being impossible to use, then all those nice regulations that you create around the technology would simply make no sense. So if you ban public blockchains, then MiCA makes no sense, because there is no MiCA without public blockchains. And moving to the next slide, we used all this also knowledge and feedback from the industry, because that's how we operate. We are basically the medium between, say, the European Commission and the other institutions and the crypto industry. We translate them, like interpret what both want to say to each other. So what we did was we responded to a recent draft guidelines by the European Data Protection Board. It's a very important EU authority that consists of all national competent authorities that deal with data protection on member state level, and then they come together and they interpret the GDPR in particular circumstances, in this case in blockchain, whenever blockchain is being used. And it was quite unfavorable when it comes to using public blockchain. So we used this opportunity to go through all our concerns and to highlight also the solution of basically we need to redefine what anonymity, pseudonymity is, what personal data is, because what's currently happening is that we keep expanding the scope of personal data in a way that makes basically no technology compliant in the future, in the long term. So we responded, and the thing that we we use this as an example of kind of the thinking that we are opposing in this case. That's not the only issue, but we wanted to highlight it here because it reflects the problem. Basically, what they're saying in these draft guidelines is that whenever a blockchain by design cannot be compliant with the GDPR, then and if that cannot be rectified, then the blockchain needs to be deleted. So in a sense, their way of solving this problem is not by thinking of ways to improve the protection of that data, of acknowledging that data is being protected, and all these things that have already been built by the industry, but instead saying, sorry, this does not fit our strict definition of how data should be protected, so you need to go back and delete the whole infrastructure that is already being used for quite a lot of other different things. So yeah, with this I'll end, but I'm gonna just mention, it is not official, but from what we have seen, we have definitely been heard. So even going back to the Data Act, in the recent proposal, that's not official, so it's not in the slides, but going back to the Data Act and the definition of smart contracts in the already infamous Article 36, there are proposals by the Commission to remove that due to the uncertainty of that term and the potential negative implications on public permissionless blockchains. So this is also to show that you need to also kind of be vocal about these things, because they're very often heard and potentially fixed.
Thank you very much, Vyara. And I will just add a few new things just for 2 minutes because our presentation is ending. Again, just as a showcase for anyone here to learn, we are going through regulations. We are then trying to change them, give feedback, and there are rethinkings around, how we design those regulations. And then they might be also changed or amended. So it's a whole life cycle of a regulation, and then ending with also seeing what the final framework it's going to be. One very important thing is also the infrastructure that I mentioned before. So thinking about infrastructure neutrality, the EU is thinking a lot about sovereign infrastructure, thinking about the European AI, cloud, etc., and might be relatable as well. So thinking about how to produce the most important technologies in-house somehow. And we do think that thinking about blockchain, thinking about permissionless and public blockchains in this case could be useful, and specifically because of adding resilience, adding open source and other values like neutrality that could help with basically this infrastructure as well. Another thing that was important for us is also preventing fragmentation. As we mentioned before, the Data Act, but also so many other regulations that are linked to data, as I mentioned before, even linked to finance data. And just the last part, when we think about finance and blockchain, there has been a very interesting report written last year by Fabian Schar on enhancing financial services with permissionless blockchain. And I would say that partially a result of this report is also right now thinking about the DLT framework, the renewal of the DLT framework, implementing privacy, security, resilience, and decentralization in the framework as well, or at least allowing for it. And the last part is really Savings and Investments Union as a new strategy that the EU is now finalizing and thinking about how to propose new financial solutions to the European Union citizens. And within this, also thinking about the DLT pilot regime, tokenization, and what is the role of blockchain in this part in finance in the EU. So thank you for listening, and we'll stop here if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really interesting presentation. And for those who view us, you could put your questions in the YouTube section. But I was really curious to hear about the Data Unions initiative, and maybe you can speak a bit about when we could see the first data unions in Europe, and in which spheres they might occur first.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. I think it was discussed in the past as well. We had some like the Gaia X and similar. You're probably familiar with that. And I think that the new basically Data Act and the new frameworks, the Governance Act as well, are going to serve as a framework for basically building more. I think the desire is definitely to have more data unions and have more, like, I would say, functional and thriving marketplaces, but it feels like we're just starting also, I would say, with the interaction of AI and seeing how this is going to develop to make it in a way more competitive and efficient. So I hope that we'll see more of those soon.
Nice. And I think you also mentioned the European infrastructure like EBSI. What do you think of it? How successful is the experiment, and what should we expect from it?
Yes, I think that it is a very, very important topic right now, and there's a lot of, I would say, resources that have been put into this. We are also, at a stage of the process that has not ended. Like, we're still discussing this part, and I think there's been a lot of, in a way, moving parts. But as I mentioned, I think that partially, at least, we need to look into blockchains and the topics that we're discussing here, basically making the resilience the number one important thing, but also basically thinking about decentralization as something to be added to the cybersecurity resilience part, and exploring this technologies a little bit, I would say more. We've seen what happened. I think this was widely discussed with the problems that everyone had with Amazon Web Services in the last few weeks. So really thinking about how to diversify the tech that we're using, and then making it, of course, resilient, and everyone to think about those, times when this happens, for everyone to be ready as well. But at the same time, I think diversification is quite useful in these cases as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Then we'll prepare for the next speaker and hope to dive deeper in the research you shared.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.